Parashat Tetzaveh, everyone loves discussing the first half of the parsha, the big day kahuna, the garments of the kohanim, and sometimes the second half of the parsha gets short shrift. The second half discusses the Miluim, the process of dedicating and preparing the Mishkan for the avodah, for its role. And it's not so surprising that the Miluim gets short shrift because it's a very mysterious process, and it's hard to understand what it's about, why it's here, and even more so, why it seems to get repeated later in Parashat Tetzaveh, and there seems to be another step of dedication in Parashat Shemini, and yet another step of dedication of the Mishkan in Parashat Naso. So I want to try to understand at least an aspect of what's going on with the Miluim, with this dedication process, by turning towards another story of dedication elsewhere in Tanakh, the dedication of the first Beis HaMikdash by Shlomo HaMelech. The Gemara Moed Katan and Daf Tes describes a very fascinating story based on a pasuk in Malachim and Divrei Yamim, which says that Shlomo HaMelech made the dedication celebration, Chanukah, of the first Beis HaMikdash for Shivas Yamim v'Shivas Yamim, 7 days and 7 days, which the Gemara describes as the 7 days leading up to Sukkot, followed by 7 days of Sukkot. The Gemara says that the first 7 days where they celebrated the Chanukas HaMikdash, dedication of the Mikdash, included Yom Kippur, and Ba'oso Shana Lo Asu Yisrael As Yom HaKippur. And that year, Bnei Yisrael didn't do Yom Kippur. We've shown him discuss exactly what that means, but at the very least, it's clear that there was at least some eating that was done on Yom Kippur, and they may not have done Yom Kippur at all that year because it was overridden by the celebration of the dedication of the Mikdash. However, weird as that may sound, Bnei Yisrael in that generation also were a little concerned. The Gemara says that maybe we did something wrong here, that we ate on Yom Kippur. They were very concerned, and the Gemara says that in the end, the Baskol came out, a heavenly voice said that they had a mechila, that the sin of Yom Kippur was atoned for them. So the Mefarshim say, well, wait a second, what kind of atonement was necessary if Shlomo HaMelech and his Sanhedrin came to a decision that it was appropriate to push off Yom Kippur on that year? So then what kind of kapara or atonement was necessary? The Maharsha suggests maybe the people who ate shalol l'shem shamayim, people who ate not for pure motives of celebrating the Mikdash, but just for their own personal pleasure, maybe they needed a kapara, they needed an atonement. Rabbi Yosef Engel mentions in this context the fascinating tshuva of the Chavos Yoyer, where he suggests that perhaps even in situations where we're able to push off things that are normally prohibited in order to accomplish certain mitzvos, maybe we still need a certain level of atonement, a certain aspect of atonement for pushing off the Isser, even in a situation where that's the right thing to do. Rabbi Yosef Engel has a lot of hesitation about such an approach, especially in situations like Aseh Docha Lo Taseh. It doesn't sound like by violating the Lo Taseh we've done anything wrong at all, because again, in such a situation, you're supposed to be doing the Aseh. So it's difficult to say that they were doing everything completely right, but they still needed atonement. I think the simpler understanding is, as the Rashash suggests, that maybe the logic of Shlomo HaMelech and his Beis Din, when they decided to push off Yom Kippur for the dedication of the Mikdash, maybe there was actually something flawed in that logic. And the Gemara itself discusses it was not simple, the logic behind this halachic decision that was made. So what exactly was wrong with this decision? So it's a little tricky to determine the exact halachos of what's supposed to take place, what's supposed to occur when a mikdash is dedicated, because each time in Tanakh that we see a mishkan or a mikdash being dedicated, we see some sort of a ceremony and some sort of a celebration, but it doesn't always play out the same exact way. In fact, the Rambam attacked those who counted the dedication of the mikdash as a mitzvah, because the Rambam said clearly it's not a mitzvah l'doros, clearly it's not a mitzvah for all generations, because each time it was done in a different way. And the Rambam says we don't count mitzvos that are not everlasting in the count of 613 mitzvos. The Ramban, however, defended this view that the Chanukas HaMikdash is a mitzvah, and explained that even though the details may change in different generations, and the principle that there should be some sort of a ceremony for dedicating a new Mishkan or Mikdash, that is a everlasting mitzvah which applies in all generations. And the Kinas Sofrim, one of the commentators on Sefer HaMitzvos, fleshes out this idea of the Ramban a little further and explains that in a given generation, when the Mikdash is dedicated, the Chachamim in that generation have to determine what is the appropriate way, what are the appropriate details of how to dedicate and how to celebrate this new Mikdash or Mishkan, given the circumstances of that generation. If that's the case, perhaps we can gain a better understanding of what went wrong in the dedication of Shlomo when they pushed off Yom Kippur. It's interesting to note that the way the Gemara, and based on the Psukim, describes the dedication of Shlomo HaMelech, it seems like they jumped straight to the celebratory stage of dedication, of Chanukah. Whereas, if we look at the original model of the dedication of the Mishkan, starting in this week's parasha, Tetzaveh, we see that before we get to the more celebratory stage of the Chanukas HaNesiyim, the 12 days of Korbanos of the different Nesiyim in Parashat Naso, first we go through the 7 days in Tetzaveh, which are a much more serious process, centered around Korban Chatas and cleansing the Mishkan, preparing the Kohanim. I would say there's a theme of yira, a theme of awe, and preparation, trying to make ourselves and make this Mishkan worthy of the Hashras HaShechina, of the divine presence. Only then do we reach a certain pinnacle of an encounter with God on the 8th day, the Yom HaShemini, described in Parashat Shemini, and only following that do we enter a more celebratory stage of dedicating the Mizbeach with the 12 days of Nesiyim in Parashat Naso. In the dedication of Shlomo HaMelech, that stage of Miluim and of a sense of Yira preceding the stage of Ahava seems to have been skipped. And Shlomo HaMelech may have felt that was appropriate, given the amazing state of Bnei Yisrael and their relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu at that time, a time of Shir Hashirim, a time of tremendous Ava between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael. They may have felt that the stage of Yira, of Miluim, was not necessary, and they could skip straight to the celebration. Given that, of course, they had to push off Yom Kippur, because it was a celebratory phase, a celebratory Chanukas HaMikdash. And how could you have such a celebration? Ein simcha b'li basar, ein simcha b'li yayin. So they felt, of course, they had to eat on Yom Kippur. But, in fact, that may have been a mistake. So much so that the Rogatchover, cited in Igrot L'Raya, suggested that they actually had to bring a par helam davar. The Sanhedrin actually had to bring a special korban for a mistaken psak that year for paskening that everyone should eat on Yom Kippur. Because even at that time, even at that heady time of the construction of the first Beis HaMikdash, perhaps they should have learned the lesson from this week's parasha, from Tetzaveh, that before we can celebrate, we have to dedicate, consecrate, prepare, step back with a sense of awe about how we can make ourselves and make this Mishkan worthy of the Hashras HaShechina.